But since I knew you, I thought it'd be better if we do it this way, more comfortable setting. So, okay, so, and we're going to vary in the order that we let people speak. So I'll probably start off first with Doris, go this way. But then as we go along, then I'm going to try to pick different people so that we can mix it up, so that not always the first person is, Doris is the first person speaking of, whatever comes to mind. And we do understand that you haven't been around as long, but 50 years is still a long time. Let me tell you, it's longer than I've been born, so. So we do value anything and everything that you have to say. So we have, with the detailed questions, we have up to 3 minutes, and when we get close to that 3 minutes, then we'll kind of, say, let's wrap it up, and then we'll go on to the next one. So, okay, so Doris, we'll start with you. Please state your full name, your full married name, and your full maiden name, please.
I'm Doris McKently. My husband's name is Melvin, but because he was in the Army, he got called Mac, so he is Mac. And my maiden name was Basher. My father was a doctor, which is the reason we were here, because he helped build Montesano Hospital. And I had 2 younger sisters. One is now in Arizona, and the other has passed away.
Okay. And please state your gender.
Well, I'm a mother.
So you gotta
and a wife. And I was a girl when I first came to this church.
What is your current address?
2223 Bonita Drive in Glendale. Even though this is still my neighborhood church and I come here, I really lived in Glendale for a long time. We built a house there in 1951, and in 1946 my father bought what turned out to be the oldest house in Glendale, old adobe property, and then I was hired by the Glendale Unified School District in 1940 when I graduated from Occidental College, so I've had a lot of connection with Glendale, and incidentally, the reason I was at Occidental College probably was because I went to this church.
Okay.
Another story.
Yeah. Let's see, what's your, where were you born?
I actually was born in Los Angeles. I'm an Angelina, and very proud of that, at what was then the Methodist Hospital, I understand. And before that, we lived just off of Sunset, off of Benton Way, at the other end of the dam, so I've been in this area really since I could toddle.
What year did you move to Silver Lake?
In 1927, we moved in the summer. We moved in June, and I had the first grade at Mitchell Terrena. So then we moved in, and the next year I started at Ivanhoe in the fall of 1927.
Okay. Could you state your birth date, please?
June 18th, 1920. It's easy to figure because zeros are easy.
Could you give me your parents' names and any of your siblings' names?
My father was Dr. Ernest G. Basher, and he has an interesting story. And my mother was Jane Basher. Her maiden name was Slauson. She grew up in Monrovia, and she also was a doctor, but she didn't practice, but she kept her license. She might be needed sometime. I'm the oldest of 3 girls. The next sister, Ruth, became a nurse, married a doctor in the San Francisco area, and is now deceased, but has 7 children that I keep track of. And my youngest sister was born at Montesano Hospital in this area, and now lives in Arizona, but had 4 children, all of whom had been involved in this church because she lived in Edenhurst and Atwater for quite a while.
Okay. And what year did you start coming to Silver Lake Presbyterian Church in its first
incarnation? In the summer of
incarnation?
1927, because we were newly moved there, and of course the first thing a child does is look for somebody to play with, which meant it had to be a girl. There actually is a boy that I correspond with, but boys didn't count in those days. And that summer, there was a knock on the door, and Arlene Lott knocked on the door and said, "Would you like to come to Sunday school with me?" Which became why I'm here. We, of course, walked to Sunday school. We walked to the old church on Rowena. I can tell you more about that. And I say that that's the way you should have people come to church, is to knock on the door and invite them.
That's great. Okay, so that's the end of the short questions, so I'll now go to Joy and ask you the same set of questions. Okay, Joy, please state your full name, full married name, and full maiden name.
Well, I was Joy May Mathews, and I married Walton Eugene Tinsley, so now I'm Joy Tinsley.
Okay, please state your gender.
I'm a lady.
Lady, okay. Could you tell me your current address, please?
2210 Moreno Drive.
And that's in Silver Lake?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Where were you born?
In Oakland, California.
Okay. And what year did you move to Silver Lake?
1960.
Okay. Can you give me your birth date, please?
February 11, 1929.
Okay. Can you give me your parents' names and any of your siblings' names?
My parents were Mr. and Mrs. Arden Mathews, and we lived in Hermosa Beach until I was 14. And my brother, one and only brother, was named Arden Richard.
Okay. And what year did you start coming to Silver Lake Presbyterian Church?
1963.
63. Okay, thank you. Now we'll go to Jean and ask the same questions. Jean, please give me your full married name and your full maiden name.
I'm Mary Eugenia Keck. My husband is Charles F. Keck, who's now deceased. And my maiden name was Mary Eugenia Gentry.
Okay. Please state your gender. Okay. Could you give me your current address, please?
3090 St. George Street, Los Angeles, and that's 90027.
Where were you born?
I was born near Minden, Louisiana,
Okay. What year did you move to Silver Lake?
in May of 1955. We bought the house we live in now, May 1955.
Can you please give me your birth date?
November the 18th, 1923.
Okay. Can you give me your parents' names and any of your siblings' names?
And my parents were William Arden and Susan Eugenia Gentry. And I had, at one time, I only have one sister now, but at one time I had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. My brothers were William, Russell, and Thomas, and my sisters were Betty, Miriam, and Janice, and only Betty survives.
Okay. What year did you start going to Silver Lake Presbyterian Church?
In March of 1957.
Okay. Thank you. Now we'll go on to the more detailed questions where we'll give you up to 3 minutes to answer, and we'll let one person go and then move to the next person and so on. Yes. Yeah.
What is this little hand symbol?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know, but it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Okay, thinking back to when you were working, what was your main occupation during those years when you were working?
My main occupation for 25 years was housewife.
Housewife, okay.
And then in 1971, I started working at USC because my daughter Alice wanted to go to the USC School of Music. And at that time, you got half tuition if you worked at USC. And I continued to work there until 1990.
Okay. How did you get to work?
I drove.
You drove, okay. Okay. Joy, can you give me your main occupation?
Well, in the very beginning of my married life, I was a service representative for the telephone company, and I rode the J car to work, and the big red streetcar, and then I became a homemaker and with children.
Okay, thank you. And Doris, what was your main occupation?
I taught school in Glendale and then in Montrose for 10 or 11 years. Then I played mother for 15, and then I went back and taught at another elementary school for 20. And then I still did outdoor education trips with the 6th graders to Catalina, but I've been retired for, I guess, 18 or 19 years. But I still am involved somehow.
How did you get to work?
I drove.
You drove?
I drove. Actually, during the war years, I had a B coupon because I was driving from Silver Lake to Montrose. It was classified as a jitney because I picked up several teachers on the way.
Interesting, okay. Let's see. Do you remember, I'll start off with Doris, do you remember your first address in this area?
Well, it was the same 12726 Lakewood Avenue. And before that, it was 1325 Angeles Avenue. I don't change much.
And I guess, Joy, your first address?
Yes, first and only address in this area is 2210 Moreno Drive
Okay.
in Silver Lake. And before that, we lived in Echo Park on Princeton Avenue.
What years did you live in Echo Park?
Well, let's see. It'd be about 4 years previous to moving here in 60s.
Okay. And Jean, your first address in this area?
Was 3090 St. George Street.
Mhm.
Previous to that, we lived 10 years at 642 North Florey Street in Hollywood, West Hollywood.
Huh.
And I forgot to mention that during the war, I was a weather observer for the United States Weather Bureau. And I met my husband while he was in the service in Anchorage, Alaska.
Hmm.
And we were married there in September of 45.
Hmm. That's great. Okay, since we're moving along here, Joy, what was your parents' occupation and where were they employed?
Well, my father was an insurance agent in Hermosa Beach. He was also the mayor. And my mother was a homemaker.
Okay. Doris, what was your parents' occupation and where were they employed?
They were both trained at the College of Osteopathic Physicians and Surgeons in Los Angeles, but my mother did not practice very long. It's very interesting. She was assigned as an intern to the county hospital. They were married in 1918, so it must have been right in there. And the head of the hospital said, "I'll have no slip of a girl in my hospital." So she was not allowed to intern, and she went back to Chicago and worked in a clinic or something. But I recently talked to a very charming dermatologist in Montrose and told her the story because her name also was Jane, and she said, "There is still prejudice."
Interesting, thank you. And Jean, what was your parents' occupation and where were they employed?
My father worked for the Standard Oil Company in Louisiana, and my mother was a homemaker.
Okay, thank you. Doris, do you remember the Great Depression in Silver Lake?
I have many memories of that. I'm most intrigued because I really went over this questionnaire, which I thought was a great trigger for memories.
Good.
And I can see you're going down it. I have many memories, but it really, because I suppose, as somebody said, my father was a professional person. We didn't feel it economically, but I can always hear my father on the phone talking to patients. "Can you pay the hospital bill?" Because the doctors came later. I first remember seeing this strange word, LEASE, on houses. There were lots of houses for rent, and of course now I know that the families couldn't keep up the payments, and I know what a lease is, and it affected other people much more. But I remember filling the baskets. I was laughing. My parents had hard time parties. I can't remember all the things that they did about it. And of course, this is when all of the letter agencies came in. The young men would go into the CCC, and then there was all of the federal ones. You know, every NRA. I could just go on with the initials forever. So I have many Depression memories, the Okies and the Arkies and the all of those things, which I'd be glad to go on. One thing we were mentioning, you walked then, or the young people had to ride the rails, and as we waited at the crossings, we used to count the hobos. We were talking about how they would come all the way from the railroad crossing at the border of Glendale clear over to Silver Lake asking for food, and I've compared other experiences to my husband, who was an Easterner, and again, this was the thing. We used to count the number of people riding the rails.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, the question is, do you remember the Great Depression in Silver Lake? Were both of you ladies in the Silver Lake area during the Great Depression?
I was not.
I was not.
Okay, thank you.
I would ask them.
Okay, well then, what are your memories, if any, of the Great Depression, which I think ran into the late 30s, right? Joy?
really was a bit young to remember a lot of that.
Okay.
I know at the dinner table, my parents would discuss grave subjects, but I wasn't a part of it.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Jean?
I remember a lot of things. I remember children coming to school when I was in elementary school, and they might have a biscuit and a big piece of fried pork rind, and they were lucky to, some of them were lucky to have anything. We were fortunate in that my father had a job, but many people were unemployed, and the women, I lived out in the country from 1934 until about 1938. And the women used to make clothing out of bleached flour sacks and feed sacks, and sometimes all of the printing would come out of the sacks. And one flour company in Texas started putting their flour in printed prints, and they used them. And it was also a very creative time for some people. They made bowls out of old records. They would melt them and shape them into bowls. And they wove baskets out of, I think they did this all over, wove baskets out of pine needles. And the men did wood carving. And where I lived, the people were very compassionate and helped each other as much as they could. But it was bad all over. Even if you had a job, it was bad. I remember, and it didn't really end until 1940, just prior to World War II. Things started getting better.
Okay.
But I grew up in that time.
Okay, thank you. When you were growing up, what were your views outside your windows? Let's start off with Joy.
Well, I was blessed with a beautiful view of Silver Lake Reservoir. And eucalyptus trees were in front of it. And I still have that same view, although the eucalyptus trees have grown very tall and I don't see as much of the lake as I did. It's still, to me, a part of my life that is very dear, and I reminisce about looking out the windows and seeing that beautiful scene. I think it has enhanced my life a great deal.
That's great.
And then, of course, on clear days, we would see Baldy with its snow, and we would get all excited and call members of the family to come look out the window, particularly if the sun was setting and the snow looked pink. I think it has added so much to our life to have a view like that, and especially when I realize that many don't have that kind of beauty to look at each day. I feel most grateful. Each day I look out those windows and see the beauty that God has given the world.
Thank you. Doris, what were your views outside your windows?
I'm so glad that you mentioned the hills, because I still have to be near them. I look to my hills. My bedroom window looked right across the San Gabriels. Again, we could see Baldy, Alpenglow. But the thing that was so intriguing to me as a child were these paths, which of course were the fire breaks going down all the mountains. I still look at them. And then we saw the great fires of November 1933, which led to the destruction of the mountains, and then the great flood of 33, 34, New Year's. So I followed that, and I still look to the hills. I have to be near my mountains.
Was that in Griffith Park?
Oh no, this is looking at the mountain. This is Mount Wilson.
Oh, Mount Wilson,
Oh,
okay.
That led to the great flood of when the 30 people were lost at the American Legion Hall, and it led to the building of all kinds of waterways and a great change. If you look at any map of that, you can see all of the flood control channels, and it's a tremendous project.
Okay, great. Jean, what were your views outside your windows?
I did not grow up in California, and I lived in various places, but from my home in Silver Lake, where I've lived since 1955, I have a view of the Hyperion Reservoir. That's my view. If I go upstairs and look out my husband's window, or if I get on it, we can't normally see the reservoir because of the trees and the houses, but from the second story, you can see the Silver Lake Reservoir. In fact, this painting on the front of this, my husband painted looking out the window of his room. Yeah, we could call it a studio,
Can you-
where he worked.
Can you hold that up just one more second?
He's gonna zoom in.
It's in the office. This painting is in the office of the church.
It's great. Thank you.
Okay?
Okay, Doris, what stores do you remember in Silver Lake?
Well, we would walk down to the Safeway, which is just before Montesano Hospital, and at that time, there was just a grating across the front of Markets. And when we went to San Francisco one time, I was so interested in these markets that were inside of closed doors, which now, of course, everything is closed. And of course, at that time, they added everything up on the paper bag, and you went to the counter and you wanted a can of beans, they reached to get it. And there was a drugstore on the corner. Then very soon came Mixville, and of course, you'll get into Tom Mix. And then it was very exciting when they built the hub or whatever it was down here on Hyperion, which is now the site of Trader Joe's, and that was great to walk to. But those were the markets that we remembered. And at that time, I should mention, my mother, even before 1927, shopped at Ralph's, I think over on Santa Monica, and they delivered groceries. And the milkman at that time came with a horse.
Where was the Safeway there?
I'm trying to think of that little street that cuts between Rowena up to where the hill is where Montesano is. And the drugstore was on the corner with Green Lantern ice cream. And then there was the Safeway, and then there was the Cleaners.
Right, that's Rockaby Street, I think?
Yeah, Rockaby, that's it.
Okay,
And then they turned it, during the war, they turned it into apartments or something.
okay.
Interesting. Did we want to ask other type of stores too? I mean,
Yeah. Joy.
oh, Joy, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just
Oh, okay,
moving around.
Oh,
okay. Well,
stores.
yeah, well, one second. Doris, other types of stores, like department stores that you may have remembered?
Well, my
anything around?
joke is that we would go to Glendale because it was always easy to park. That is really a joke. Hollywood, the Broadway Hollywood and so forth. But we went downtown on the streetcar, even during the war I did that. We could catch the PE at the corner of Montesano for 7 cents down into Los Angeles. And of course, I went to the subway terminal. I could get 4 tokens for a quarter. It was 7 cents a piece. So I say 3 cents. I still have a token, and I'm kind of interested in streetcars, so I have some memorabilia about streetcars. And that was the way you got around.
Okay, thank you. Joy, what stores do you remember in Silver Lake?
Well, I very fondly remember a variety store. I don't know just what it was called, but it was where Say Cheese is now. And this little, like a 5 and dime store, was run by an older man, and my daughter loved to go there when she was little because, of course, they had toys. And he was very kind to her and let her take lots of time to pick. She picked a little lamb that she could pull, and it had a leash. And so that store became very dear to us. Of course, it closed down years ago.
Okay.
What year was that?
Oh, what year was that?
What year, do you remember the variety store being there?
It'd be about 1961.
When do you think it closed?
I imagine it closed about 64 or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
May I interrupt? Because I
Okay.
should have mentioned El Pueblo Gift Mart, which was right on the corner, which was fantastic store, kind of a Spanish mowed. I still have a folder, I just came across one, a hanky folder from El Pueblo. Then there was Hearth's Hardware.
That's in
and
Atwater
Fox-
Village, that
And
one.
the bakery, which is still, those are
Right.
very important.
I remember those, yes. Jean, what stores do you remember in Silver Lake?
As I said, we moved here in 55. I do remember going to the Hub Market, and we could afford to go to the Hub Market, but when Mayfair took over, we no longer went. Oh, just occasionally we went to the Mayfair. And of course now it's Gelson's. And I remember going to the Safeway in Atwater. And then there was beaches after the Safeway, and I do remember, like Joy, that there was a 10, 5 and dime store down near where the Trader Joe's is. In fact, that whole area has changed more from a commercial point of view than most areas, and of course, many parts of Silver Lake on Hyperion and over on Glendale and Silver Lake Boulevard, they haven't been there that long, or they were different years ago. And of course, I mostly, living where I did, like Doris, I went to Glendale because it was convenient. And then of course, we used to go to Hollywood. It used to be it was a nice place to go.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some good stores there. The Broadway department store was very good, and other things. And then it reached a point that we never went to Hollywood after about, I don't know, I think in the 70s. There was a lot of change. And another big change around here, you're probably going to ask about the schools and this church. There was a big change in our population in the 60s when they started busing children, and the parents were afraid they were going to bus their children way out of the area, so a lot of people fled to, like, Valencia was very new then, and other places out in the valley. So for a while, this church was without a strong middle-aged group, and we still are a little weak on that. And it really happened then when there was this mass movement.
Okay.
That's one of the important things I remember.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a question attached to that? So do you feel that the stores on Hyperion that changed around the 60s, it was because of that white flight, I guess you would call it?
I really don't know why it changed commercially.
I remember one thing at the corner of Hyperion and Angus. There were 4 gas stations, one on each corner, and of course now there's only one left. But it was such a different thing when they all moved away.
Do any of you remember Tokyo Florist? You know?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, Los Angeles.
Would you mind if they talked about that a little?
Yeah,
Because it's been there quite a while. Like Doris, do you remember?
Well, we should have mentioned the Japanese nurseries, because when World War II came and they were relocated, but there was one right across from Montesano, and then the big one where the convalescent home is on Rowena. And they were very important, and they were our Japanese friends.
Joy?
And another thing about the Japanese nursery, or the Tokyo Forest, is that it's been run by a family. And it's so nice to go there because they remember you from years past, and always feel rather welcomed and have such nice service and nice plants.
Jean?
Did you use the shops on Sunset? What I remember in the 70s, pretty early 70s, was that there was a group of stores that were really wonderful boutique-like places on Sunset around Mitchell Terrain, I guess. That there was a strip of stores. We used to call it the other end of Sunset. And it had the soap plant was there. I don't know if you remember it, but for us, I live on Metropolitan, and that was my shopping area. And, you know, it was for gifts and that kind of thing. And I hear you on the other side of the hill, you know. So you did not use those shops?
I used the ones down in Echo Park on Sunset, which there were little antique shops down there.
Yeah,
I think they're still there, and it was always fun to look there.
I imagine one different thing about, at that time, you went to the poultry store to get chicken or something, and I can smell it, I can hear it, and you couldn't buy chicken by the piece, and this awful noise and smell and so forth and so on. And it's made, as somebody who cooks, it makes a big difference in your kitchen life.
where
And
was
there
the
was one
poultry
right down
store?
on Riverside and Fletcher, or in that area.
And when was that?
In the early, I would say probably 20s or early 30s.
I have a question I just thought of. I was told at one point that there were a lot of wineries around Fletcher, or grape growing anyway.
Well, you're talking to the wrong person, because I come from a non-alcoholic background. My grandmother belonged to the WCTU. As children, we could smell the gratings, and when we got that yeasty bread smell, I knew they were bad people. And I'm not kidding. I used to wonder why on the rocks when we went to the mountains, and you read about the little store coming in, it said soft drinks, and I thought, why are they talking about soft drinks? I mean, I was pretty innocent. And then there was a tremendous fire one time on Kenilworth, and we looked from where I lived on Lakewood across, and this terrible house fire, and we were feeling so bad about it. And then we discovered that that big blaze was because the still blew up, and then we didn't feel so bad about it.
Well,
Don't ask me about wineries.
yeah. Well, okay, on that same level, who delivered to your home the milkman, the iceman, bread, Helms Bakery? I remember Helms Bakery. Jean?
Ador, we had Ador milk delivered to our home when I first moved there. And I think, I know the Helms bread trucks came to West Hollywood when we lived there. And I think bread trucks did still come, but I didn't buy bread from the truck. And also, our Japanese neighbors had fruit and vegetable trucks that came, and also for many years, in fact, up until a year or two ago, there were trucks that brought fresh fish to some of the neighbors. That I remember that.
Okay. Joy? Who delivered to your home, milkman, iceman?
I don't remember many deliveries after we moved to Silver Lake, but in Hermosa Beach, we had the Iceman, which the children always looked forward to because he would chip off a few little pieces for us to have to eat right on the spot. And we had the Helmsman there, and I remember they had wonderful apple upside down cake, which we would purchase. And then there was the milkman with the cream that would rise to the top of the bottle. That's about all I remember it being delivered.
Okay, thank you. And Doris?
Also, I will add Carnation Delivery and Golden State. And there was Davis Perfection Bakeries, and they came around with baked goods. We didn't, for some reason, have the Helmsman, and they also carried jams and jellies, and I know they were still in business in the 30s in Eagle Rock when I was in college. And I think we should give tribute to the Feed and Fuel at the corner here of Hyperion and Rowena, and then later there was the fabric store where Jean Postel worked, who became a Sunday school teacher with Jean and me. And the Sklars, who were a Jewish family, had the Feed and Fuel place there with a little mini mart, or, you know, Radio Shack and all that.
Okay, thank you. Doris, what was your street like? Was it busy or quiet, paved? Was there a stoplight or a stop sign?
Oh, it was a new subdivision. It was paved, but there was not much traffic. It was 2 blocks between Glendale Boulevard and Armstrong. I know the poodle we had could sleep in the middle of the street, which wasn't very good. It got stolen quite soon, but it was a quiet street. I don't remember, we must have had street lights, but I think it's interesting to know that there was a semaphore signal at the bottom of Lakewood and and Glendale Boulevard, where Rowena runs into Glendale Boulevard. And when I drove to Montrose, I think there were only 3 signals the whole way. And one of them was at the bottom of Lakewood, and then there was one other, I think maybe on Broadway in Glendale. And they were the semaphore signals. And there was one right down here in Hyperion, because I was astounded one time when a boyfriend blazingly went through the signal.
When you drove to Montrose, that was before the freeways. How did you?
Oh, of course.
How did you drive? What route did you take?
Oh, well, it's very
Remember?
simple. You go down to the bottom of the hill, then you go over by Montesano, you Riverside Drive, and then you go straight up Glendale Boulevard, all the way. In fact, I stopped and got film when we had the snow at the corner of Colorado and Glendale Boulevard, because we had snow on the ground in Montrose for 3 days, and then you just went straight on up. Nothing to it. Just took about half an hour.
Joy, what was your street like? Busy or quiet? Paved, stoplight, or stop sign?
Merino Drive was more quiet than it is now. People didn't cut through to use it as a passageway. It was paved. In fact, I think Merino Drive was paved in 1929, and some of that concrete is still there, not in the same good condition, but you see the marking. And there were I guess there was a stop sign down at Silver Lake Boulevard, but other than that, I don't remember any stoppings that were official.
Okay, thank you. Jean, what was your street like? Busy or quiet? Paved? Was there a stoplight or stop sign?
St. George was paved, and there wasn't even a stop sign at the foot of St. George and Rowena until, I don't know, 10 years ago, or maybe even later, and that was after many, many protests and many, many accidents, because, you know, Marshall High School is just farther up St. George, and it was quiet. It ends, St. George ends at Waverly Drive, so there wasn't that much traffic. You did have to be careful with your little children, because people did not expect children to be running across the street. And it hasn't really changed that much, because they haven't allowed any buildings there, no apartments or anything.
Okay, thank you. Doris, I wanted to go back to Montesano, and you said, because I remember that when I was in Atwater Village, seeing it up on the hill and everything. You said that your father was in charge of building that?
I think it was built by a group of doctors. In 1921, they formed a Los Angeles Clinical Group, which was sort of like Mayo Brothers, except Mayo's got a little bit bigger. And there was one doctor in each of the different fields. My father was in the obstetrics and later one on the surgery, but there was my uncle, Uncle Horace, who was active in this church, was ear, nose, and throat, and then he went out to the Miracle Mile, which CBS has just moved out there. And I think they built Montesano, which is the Hill of Health. And originally it was just this one building, and then they had an office building. Then they built the nurses' residence, which was quite the way to do it at that time. And then eventually it was torn on. And when I go to the medical centers now, I can see how a small private hospital could never serve the populace, but all 3 of our children were born at Montesano. To get back to your dirt roads,
Oh, yes.
Mary Warmuth, who is our old person like myself, and she remembers when all these streets were dirt roads. And incidentally, that was kind of how she met her husband, George Warmuth, who was our custodian at church and so forth. His picture's there. And I think she was trying to get across the street, and he was in some kind of a little watchman's tower, a little house or something, and he came out and he put down some cardboard or something so she could cross the street. But they were dirt streets that time.
What time?
I would say that's probably the early 20s, because they were certainly paved when we came. And when you mentioned 1929 for Merino Highlands, I'm sure that they were paved then, because Merino Highlands, which is, you know, those hills, had a great real estate promotion, and they did it by planting wildflowers all over. People would come from all over to see the wildflowers, which include red poppies as well as golden poppies and all that. And they sold their houses all. This was just at the end of prosperity, and they were still building houses into the Depression. but then it kind of slowed down. The Depression got to the West Coast later than the East Coast.
Right. I had another question for you then. The Hyperion Bridge, do you remember that?
Well, then there was the big flood, and the old bridge washed out, and then they built it, and it has a sign on it and so forth. So that was really a very fancy bridge, and I'm sure the date is on that. When we were gathering memories of Marshall High, and my friend who lived in Atwater said, "Oh, of course we walked everywhere," and walking across the bridge, which is kind of uphill. She could certainly remember that. She went to Marshall. But our street was so civilized. I mean, we paved streets, street lights, things like that. Indoor plumbing. As we didn't have an iceman because when we moved to the house in 1927, and in that area you had a maid's room and bath in the basement, and then we had upstairs, and then we had it in upstairs. But we had the first refrigerator, which was built into the wall of the kitchen, and then the generator, that's a right word, was in the basement, And that was very exciting. We thought, we can make our own ice cream. And sprinklers on the wall, all those, luxurious things.
We take for granted today. Which leads me to my next question, which I'm a little interested in. How did you keep cool in the summers, Doris?
I'm talking too much, but we would sleep out on the porch at night, and we didn't make a big fuss about it. I mean, we played cards and so forth, and I never have taught in a school with air conditioning, so you didn't make a big deal out of it. But we were very lucky across the street on Angus, the family named Severy that had 4 children. He was an inventor. He did inventions that went into the Hammond organ. And if the kids would dig the hole, they would have a swimming pool. So we dug the hole, and then it was rough concrete. The pebbles sticking out in it, and it was, and that was wonderful. So we played there all summer, and once in a while somebody got rich and put $5 worth of bluestone, I guess, as far as sanitary precautions for filter systems. There wasn't any, but. That was wonderful, but that was very rare. Mostly the only place you could swim would be the municipal pool at the corner of, down at the corner where the tennis courts are.
Right, listen.
And then it came the polio epidemic, when one of my friends' father was operating with my father in the hospital. The next day she was dead. She lived up on top of Marina Highlands. And then, of course, nobody knew how you got infantile paralysis. And then eventually they closed the theaters. You were not supposed to go to any of the swimming pools, and that's why I'm a frustrated person, because I didn't get to be a frog in the water ballet at the pool and jump off the lily pad, and so my life has been blighted by that. But what is more interesting, and I'm very interested in polio, and I did talk with Mike Everett at Glendale College, who was quite a historian at Griffith Park and all that, because there were several polio epidemics. And the reason I'm so interested is that my father was a polio victim. He had the traditional paralyzed effect. He became left-handed instead of right-handed. He had the thin leg and so forth. As a doctor, then he could tie his sutures with both hands, and he became quite ambidextrous, and it said if he could have run faster, he probably would have been a professional ball player because he was in the champion team, but he had to have his shoes built up. And I have great admiration, and during at least one of the epidemics, they would ask him to give blood because you do develop an immunity when you've had polio. And then there have been other polio epidemics, and he always gave talks for the infantile paralysis. This was before Sister Kenny, and a young doctor up in the wilds of Idaho, where he lived on a wheat ranch, massaged him. He learned to swim and swam with the little Indian boys, and maybe that was the reason he became a doctor.
Very interesting. Thank you. Joy, how did you keep cool in the summers?
We opened the windows at night and closed them early in the morning when it was still cool. Pulled the shades if we had them, and that was really the best way we kept our house cool.
Okay. Thank you. And Jean, how did you keep your house cool?
We had fans, and the same way, you opened your windows. If you had one house we lived in had a sleeping porch, they used to have porches that were screened, and you could put windows over them, and those were cool to sleep in. But where I live now, we had fans, and the upstairs gets very hot. So just lived. My children come home now, they lived and they got along quite well, they were quite healthy. But it's too cold in my house in the wintertime, and it's too hot in my house in the summertime. How things change.
Yes. Thank you. This is a very interesting one. Joy, did you have a phone? Okay, and do you remember your phone number?
That was the Normandy prefix here in Silver Lake. And our number was Normandy 37287. It just changed the first part.
Did you have a party line?
No,
No, not at that time. Okay. Thank you. Jean, did you have a phone, and do you remember your phone number?
We have the same phone we have now, only the prefix has changed a couple of times. It was Normandy first, and then it was 213, and now it's 322.
Did you have a party line at any time?
No, we didn't.
No. Okay. Okay. Doris, did you have a phone?
Olympia 3977. We had 2 phones and 2 direct lines to the hospital. When I built my house, because Mac was in Korea in 1951, I had a phone put in. It was a party line, but I never bumped into anybody else, and I was living by myself with the baby, which was interesting. I looked to see what my phone number would be, and it was 30977. I still have the same number. It was then Citrus.
Interesting. Okay. Jean, did you have any pets?
We had, well, at home, we always had hunting dogs. My father hunted. My own family, we couldn't have cats because my youngest son would break out in hives if he got near a cat. And we did have dogs outside. And
Okay. Joy, did you have pets?
we had one outstanding Scotty dog, and loved him for 13 years, and that was our only pet outside of rabbits, which my daughter had in the back garden.
Okay. And Doris, did you have any pets?
Not really big, although the family that moved next door had bantam hens and all kinds of pets. We did have a cat that would lovingly bring a gopher to my mother every day, until one day she was really awfully tired. "Oh, take that away," and they never brought her another one. I think my mother kept the cat because that gave her an excuse to buy salmon. She buys salmon. But I don't think the pet culture was as big. Certainly not the animal food, which is, I guess, the biggest business in the world.
Okay. This is, I would say, when you were growing up, of course, you may not have grown up in the Silver Lake area, but I'll still ask you that question. Doris, who was your best friend? Where did you play?
There were 4 girls that moved in next door, so there were 7 girls on the hill, and boys didn't count anyway at that time. The family, the lots that, and you introduced me to the
Right.
Aikens, oldest, there were 3 girls, and then Webster, whom they always called a boy. And so there was June, and she was older, but they were in Mr. Lott was the playground director in the Los Angeles playground department. And June would give little plays, and we would go around to the different playground departments, and Mother made our costumes, and we did things to the toy soldiers and all that sort of thing, music. And so I just finished a letter to my friend from 1927 who lived at 3012 Hyperion, right where the steps go up there. So we were very lucky, and because we stayed in one place, I still have friends that I correspond with.
What do you remember about your friend's family and home?
I could probably draw their houses, but I say the Severies having a swimming pool and so forth. However, this was the time when many new houses were being built. I went through all the new houses, and anyway, it was interesting houses.
Okay, thank you. Jean, when you were growing up, who was your best friend? Where did you play?
I lived in rural areas, so I didn't have close neighbors, and there seemed to be boys where we lived. And my poor younger brother, Russell, got dragged everywhere he would go. My older brother always had his own things to do. But, and then my sister, next sister, was almost 5 years younger than I was. So I don't remember anything except school friends, and I can't remember from that far back. I've lived in so many different places
Okay.
then and since then, so.
Okay. Joy, who was your best friend? Where did you play?
Well, when I lived in Hermosa Beach, my two best friends lived on either side of me, and that was Bobby Bacon and Bobby Plank. And we played in the sand lot between our houses, and we played kick the can a lot. And I remember Bobby Bacon and I used to make mud pies in the bacon lot, and he sort of growled because he was a man and insisted that wasn't a man's work. But he would grind up batteries, if I remember correctly, to add to my batter.
They give texture.
Well, what do you remember about your friend's family and home?
The thing I remember very warmly about Bob Plank's family was the fact that his mother had been a teacher, and she helped me learn to read. And I've always been grateful for that because I wasn't doing too well, and she just helped me over that hump. It was so wonderful to go to her house. And then Bobby Bacon's family was had an English background, and everything was very formal there and done in a traditional fashion. And I remember playing with the handmade blocks that they had. I really enjoyed both those families very much.
Okay, thank you. Doris, how was your neighborhood lit? Street lights, porch lights?
I guess we had street lights and we had garden lights because we had 3 lots landscaped, so.
Okay. And Joy, how was your neighborhood lit? Street lights, porch light?
I beg your pardon.
How was your neighborhood lit? Street lights, porch lights?
In Hermosa Beach
Yeah.
and in Silver Lake both, we had street lights
Mhm.
and plenty of it. I don't remember it being dark.
Okay. Angie?
I lived in either rural or suburban areas, and we didn't, the places were so far apart,
Yeah.
we didn't have lights. And in the country, when I was a child, they used coal oil or kerosene lamps, and I think we had coal and gas lanterns too with the mantles. And then in one place, we had electricity, but we had our own Delco generator. So that was, and of course, here in recent times, of course, lived in the city and had all the conveniences of the city.
Okay, thank you. Joy, how did you travel downtown?
When I lived in Hermosa Beach, we traveled by J car, or not, that wasn't necessarily the number or letter, but the streetcar.
Mhm.
I remember coming into town to get school clothes, and that was quite exciting because I liked riding the big red car. And of course, in Silver Lake, this area, we used the car.
Okay. And Jean, how did you get to downtown?
Well, from here, when you live in Silver Lake, I occasionally rode the bus, and I remember riding the red car years ago, but we usually went by car, even from 45, and that's when I first moved here.
Okay. Doris, how did you get to downtown?
Oh, we took the streetcar. Again, we did lots of walking. I, just for fun, took China painting at Hollywood High, and I went over by the bus, and I went to Thomas Stark King, we ran to the bus, and no problem, but mostly by private car.
Okay, you want to take a quick break? We'll do if you want to do bathroom break, maybe get some more water, stretch. We'll just take a quick break right now.
I think this is very interesting, Jean, to have you here from another part of the country and some rural thing. I think it's very, very helpful.
Comparing
The contrast
Yeah.
and then being here, you know.
By the way, is Anne Frank still alive?
No.
When did she die?
About 5 years ago.
And she was 100 though, wasn't she? She turned 100. Yes.
You know, it's so interesting listening to you, so I'm in individuals' lives, but it's really wonderful.
I think this questionnaire is very interesting, and I remember one lady friend, very interesting. Thank you. What is the secret of making this become a pen center?
Pull it really hard.
Secret.
Okay, well, I didn't want to destroy it. Thank you. I keep saying I'm not into computers, I'm barely into ballpoints, and now I think I can't even use a pencil.
I lived in 6 different houses. And I've lived here in this house the longest I ever lived any place or any house.
Jean, tell me again, wasn't that how your house moved from Hollywood, didn't you?
Yes, it was in 1935. It was built in 1905. It's 100 years old.
Very interesting, I wouldn't have known that. They did lots of moving of houses. I can still remember when they moved the nursery and all those glass panes rattling, you know. And in Glendale, all kinds of houses had moved and turned around. And of course, when the freeways came, you could go and buy these houses up on stilts, you know, and have to move to your...
Yeah, and I wonder how they got that up St. George Hill without...
I don't know. It was, of course, they moved the doctor's house where I dosed from another part of Glendale. Right.
You know what I was thinking of in terms
Our
of,
Valentine bulletin where they speak of the doctor's house and how kind you were.
Doris is a very gifted person.
I'll see you as you visit next Thursday.
Yeah.
Yes, we start
I'll bring it.
And she thought a great deal of this church. She was brought up as a Christian Scientist and then was in Hollywood Press and so forth, but she really doesn't hear. And yet she comes with our wonderful, wonderful music, and I would write all the sermons. Well, now she's been in the hospital, da-da-dee-da. Now permanently, probably, she's at the Sycamores in East Pasadena. But I send her the bulletin and write her things down.
Oh, okay.
But I would write all the time, besides I write all the time, to tell what the sermon is. And that's when I discovered or realized how beautifully structured Randy's sermons are. And only when you write it down and really pay attention to it do you have the respect that I have for his structured sermons.
Okay, so we have about 4 or 5 more questions relating specifically to Silver Lake, whatever time frame you're here, because it's very, very important that we learn the different decades and how Silver Lake was. Okay, so first question, let's start off with Doris. What was your neighborhood's landmarks in this area? Very important.
Oh, well, that's when we first were going to do this. But of course, Montesano Hospital, the Breakfast Club, Mixville, we talked about that. And of course, there were many movie studios, and that's a big part of Silver Lake history, I'm sure you know. And then we looked at Earl C. Anthony's house up on the hill. And I talked about the Merino Highlands. The Antonio Marino's home was what became the Canfield home. I didn't know about him because he was an early 20s movie star, but that's what gave the name to it. So those, I suppose, were the main things.
Okay.
The Breakfast Club was,
Friendship Territory.
oh, okay.
The Los
The
Angeles
Friendship
Breakfast
Auditorium.
Club, of which my father was almost a charter member, and I did dig up the postcard, and of course now it's down on Riverside Drive, but the story is these men were horseback riders, and they met together. 2 of them would be the hosts and stand them to breakfast, and so then even all through my childhood, yeah.
Could you hold that up, please?
Oh, well, yes.
We got the Zoom.
You don't have to stop talking.
is that right?
I think I can hold and talk. Incidentally, now
different,
the
doesn't
women
it?
are allowed. Arlene Stewart of our church has been a president of it. But it was called the Shrine of Friendship, and they had the Breakfast Club cryptogram, happy and eggs, yes, we had ham and eggs, and the singing and the camaraderie, and then every week they would have whoever was important in the world that had come to Los Angeles as the speaker. This is all before television, and it was really a great gathering place for the leaders, really, of Los Angeles. And Then eventually they had big property over on Los Feliz, and then they were not running that. It's now a big apartment complex or condo complex. And they went back to Riverside Drive, where there was, incidentally, a riding stables with this first covered riding ring, California riding stables, practically under the bridge, which now is the Breakfast Club. And actually, my father and George Jelty of the Los Angeles Park Department were very influential in getting the property and transferring it. And then they owned the club, but the city had the property, and all kind of an arrangement. And now, of course, women have joined service clubs, and it's a different world. But they still have breakfast, they still have important programs, and I have the flyer. I was kind of interested. Apparently it started in 1925, and it tells about having all the speakers and interesting speakers each week, and so it's still going on, and it still is the shrine of friendship, and that is an important positive thing about the neighborhood. I don't know what we're getting to. You want to know more about the Breakfast Club?
That's good.
Yeah, that's good, thank you.
Thanks.
Joy, what were the neighborhood landmarks when you were here?
Well, I'll tell you my very favorite one. It was Curry's Mile High Ice Cream. And it was down on, near Riverside Drive on Fletcher. And it had a huge mile-high cone as their sign up above the roof. And so that was my favorite spot for Silver Lake when we first moved here.
What year, in 1961?
60.
But they were in the 30s, I know, because I went to USC, they started, wonderful flavors.
Yes, all kinds of,
Pineapple, grape, and exotic.
yeah, all kinds of flavors in it. But having children, it became our favorite landmark.
Right.
Was it the same building where Rudolfo's is now, or was it a different building at the
So
time?
I think Rodolfo's is there.
It's where that salsa club
Yes,
is.
exactly.
Rudolfo's.
It's that same building?
I go by it all the time.
Jean, what were some of the landmarks?
In this area?
Yeah.
Well, there's a southern colonial mansion up on Waverly, just right near my house. And I think, I was told that didn't Disney own that house? Or somebody in the Disney family built it. And then, of course, there is, I knew it as the Don Lee Estate, which is now Immaculate Heart kind of sanctuary.
Right.
And they also have priests there too now. That's one just right near me. And then, of course, I think the Hyperion Bridge is an important landmark. And of course, the reservoir has changed. Hyperion Reservoir used to be a nice lake. And now, of course, it's covered and it's more beautiful in a way than it was before, but it's all artificial. They have cascades and it's all fenced. You can't get in there. You have to look at it from up above. But other than some of the things that they've already mentioned, I think those are.
Okay. Speaking of the Silver Lake area, kind of a two-part question that I'm merging together is, what schools did either you attend in the Silver Lake area or your children? So let's start off with Joy.
All right, our children went to the local schools, Ivanhoe Elementary School, and to Thomas Starr King Middle School, and to Marshall High School. All three of our children attended those three.
Okay. Any changes during those years to any of the campuses?
Yes, they almost demolished part of Marshall, the brick part in front, which is so historical. But there was campaigning to keep it, and it worked out that it was able to be restored.
Jean, same question?
My children went to Ivanhoe, Thomas Starr King and Marshall. My older daughter Linda started at Rosewood Avenue in West Hollywood. But I too, like Joy, remember the renovation of Marshall High School. I guess it was from earthquake damage. And Bernard Zimmerman used to live across the street from me on St. George, as an architect. And he was very influential in getting Marshall High School, keeping it, and also restoring it, making it, I guess, earthquake proof. But King, I think the building has been changed somewhat in King, and Ivanhoe, of course, had to have bungalows added when the enrollment increased so much. But that's all I can do.
Thank you. And Doris?
Oh, I went to Mitchell Trent until we moved here, and I went to Ivanhoe. That building was crumbled or something in the 33 earthquake, so there is another building there now. And then one semester at Thomas Starr King till they built Marshall, which is, everybody must know, I was there the day it opened in 1931, and we're heading for our 75th anniversary. We've been doing lots of remembering of that. And of course, it was one building, then they added the other building, and eventually we had no auditorium, we had no gymnasium, we had nothing, but we sat on the hillside in the dirt and cheered the football team and joined the athletic.
What were the grades at John Marshall?
It started in 1931, February, as 7th through 11th. By the next year, those 11th graders were 12th graders, so the first graduating class was that year. And there are 5 or 6 of the zippiest people you've ever seen who belonged to that class, and we had a reunion last year, and there's going to be a big one again at Locking Out a Country Club. In January 28th, I think it is, of 2006. So there's a lot, and 4 women really get a lot of the credit for saving John Marshall High School, and Cheryl Bowler was one of them, and Dr. Winder of Occidental, who is a historian, and it was a great tribute that they did not tear it down like Los Angeles High School, and so it's called the last high school Gothic, and of course it's been the site of many movies, and one of the teachers and also a Marshall alum has done a great history of that. But we're filling in some of the things of the early years, been used in many films and so forth. And I don't know how we missed it, but when we're talking about Silver Lake and the reservoir, this reservoir had sheds over it, and at the east end of Silver Lake, it was all covered with brown sheds. And so we had to look over the sheds from our end to see the lake. And the story was that they were going to take the sheds away and put 40, this is as a child I remember, 40 tennis courts, and it would be a recreation center. But that didn't happen, but they did take the sheds off of them, and then they filled in part of it over by Neutra's house.
Interesting.
That's Silver Lake Reservoir.
Silver Lake Reservoir.
Yes.
They call this Ivanhoe now.
Well, it's a Hyperion Reservoir.
Well, but the
Rolling.
sign had the word Ivanhoe in
Right,
it.
the one that time, it could have, yes.
That's Ivanhoe over by Silver Lake Reservoir, yeah. Where they had the sheds, the one you were talking
Well,
about.
they had sheds on this one too.
Also, yeah.
Because I can tell you about my friend and I, Etri, who went swimming and all that. I have to tell you about Ivanhoe because Faye Ireland in our choir and a wonderful church friend who did teach at Ivanhoe, and she had her 6th grade graduating class in June 1976. They did a story of Ivanhoe, why Ivanhoe, why it was named. They did the research, and she kindly let me copy it, and it was really just fascinating.
Yeah.
And they made a song about it, and it's just incredible.
We'll be interested in seeing that. Thank you. Yeah.
I copied it from Faye. I asked her if it was all right. She said it was.
Okay. Okay, now we'll go into the film industry in the Silver Lake area. You mentioned Mixville, which until this year I never knew about that. Let's start off with you, Jean. What do you remember about the film industry in Silver Lake, Mixville, if it was
I
still
don't
around?
even remember it. I do remember when I first moved here, down on Hyperion, they used to say that right across the street from what is now Trader Joe's, that that was part of the Disney studio. But that's all I remember.
Okay, thank you. And Joy?
I'm very similar in my memory. I remember that sign, but I don't remember anything else. Someone told me once that those little cottages in back of Gelson's were put up there as a model for the houses for the 7 dwarfs and Snow White. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't know.
Okay. And Doris?
You're right, Disney started down on Hyperion and almost like half of a storefront. And then later they had a big place, which then became the Vitamin Company or something like that on Hyperion. But it started just as a storefront. And then I remember when they built those darling little old Englishy looking cottages, but I don't know whether they were the models, but we were all involved in Disney, and I keep saying Bambi was tethered in front of my music teacher's house, which is right behind Trader Joe, the big house that's been moved in. And so we grew up with Disney, and then Dorothy Disney, who was the niece of Walt, who was really, she was really, I won't say swinger, but you know, had platinum blonde hair, and went with Jack Reed, who had a roadster and all that sort of thing. And somehow, I don't know how, but anyway, she married Glenn Pewter, who was our minister, and we decorated the athletic building and so forth, and she's had a wonderful life. But there was lots of movie making and lots of little studios and costume studios and little places to sets, and we could go and look through the boards down below the Franklin Bridge, which we call the Franklin Bridge. And where they were filming Catherine the Great or something at night, and we could watch it. And the movie industry, and of course Max sent it down on Glendale Boulevard, and there should be a plaque still there. And my friend that I called for some other memories, and he's the one who remembered Tony, Tom Mix's horse, and all of these things. And then he said one time he rented his skates to somebody in our gang comedy who weighed 300 pounds, and I've forgotten what he got for renting his skates to him, and I'm wondering if that's Fatty Arbuckle. I'll have to find out about that. But he said, oh, we went to the Elysian Theater, going to the movies, if you could walk. We didn't go because there wasn't any place close enough to walk to. But they went to the Elysian Theater for 10 cents, and that was a part of the entertainment. And the Vista was there, and that was important. But there was lots of movie making in this area, and in Glendale, and still is.
Okay. Do you know of any actors that lived here? Maybe Mixville Studios? Maybe a little bit more on that?
I don't know.
I was friends with the Watson family, and I think there were about 6 or 7 siblings in the Watson family, and they lived in Echo Park, and they were very active in early movies. Del, see, one of them was named Del, and there was Bill. They all loved those days when they were child actors.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Joy, how much was gasoline when you were here and postage stamps?
Well, I tend to remember gasoline being at 39 cents a gallon.
This is at 1960?
And I think yes, in the 60s. And the first love stamp, I think, was 20 cents.
And Jean?
I was trying to remember that from, and I'm sorry, but I can't remember. I just know that in 1950, you could still buy quite a few groceries for $5. And I know that gasoline for 39 cents sounds pretty good. And I remember 10 and 15 cent stamps. Stamps have gone up so gradually over the years and so rapidly. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Well, penny stamps were green and penny postcards were a penny. There was a 2-cent stamp that was pink, but most of the postage was the 3-cent George Washington stamp, of which I still have a lot around. Then fun airmail came, and there was a 6-cent airmail stamp, but I think the first Pan American delivery was 50 cents, which was really very expensive, but we had 2 mail deliveries a day, even during World War II.
Interesting. How much was gas back then?
Well, I didn't pay for it. It was on my father's bill, but our first child was 1950, and I had a station wagon. I know I filled it up for 2 weeks for $3. And I didn't. This was in Glendale.
Let's see. From what I've heard, horses were. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think just one more question.
One more question. Okay, just a general question. We'll start off with Joy. Do you have any special stories about your experiences in Silver Lake?
enjoyed it all. I've enjoyed living here. Of course, I've seen it change, but that's progress in one sense of the term.
Mhm.
I've just loved it here the whole time.
Okay, thank you. And Jean?
I've enjoyed living where I live, the climate and the location and the neighborhood and the convenience to Hollywood, downtown, and Glendale, all within 4 miles. I'm glad that I live here, and I plan to live here till they have to drag me out.
Thank you. And Doris?
Well, I just think it's such a blessing that Jean did come, goes to our church and to our lives and joy, and all they brought to us. I can't say that enough. What am I supposed to be answering?
Special stories about your experiences in Silver Lake. Just a special story?
Not here. There are just lots and lots of stories. We were talking about World War II, and Joy was talking at Dosen at the doctor's house, Victorian house, and I wear a Victorian skirt made out of black material. And it's made to a pattern for a Victorian walking skirt. And I had found a box of black material among my mother's things, and I thought, where did all this black material come from? Of course, Mother made our clothes, my sister and myself, and we had bloomers to match, because then when you're upside down on the acting bars, you didn't know your bloomers match. And there are a lot of simple things. We were talking about depression, and my husband from the east said he remembered cardboard shoe bottoms. And I said, you mean instead of when you're half-soled? He says, no, they came with cardboard bottoms, and then you couldn't really play soccer with them because they wrecked the toes. And of course, we always had our shoes half-soled, and I've told Randy this, that I always kicked a little rock all the way home from Sunday school, because then you got your black patent Sunday school shoes kind of scuffed up, and then you could use them for school. I mean, all these devious things that you did in the past. But the black material was what we used to cover the windows during the blackouts during World War II. We lived on a hill, and you had to darken all the windows. And so when my daughter was making my skirt, she thought surely it would disintegrate, but she washed it. It wears like iron. It will probably wear forever, but we did have to screen out the lights, and people do not realize what it was like. We didn't know whether we were going to be bombed like Pearl Harbor. And it's very easy to criticize things that happened, but you weren't there.
Okay. Do you have any other maybe questions, or are we? We're
No,
good?
I think it was great.
Yeah, thank you very
I
much.
can tell you all put a lot of effort into thinking about the questions. You were all so articulate and, sharp about what the issues were. So thank you. Thank you very much. It was so interesting. Really.
Well, we lived in an interesting time of prosperity and war, depression and war, and again, and so forth. And I just wish they could have all had experience with the wonderful program that Jenny Fogg worked out for 9/11. This is the day.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for lunch. It
This was
delicious.
not work, it was fun.
There may be more fun in your future then.
Could you use these if I tore out the little paper?
But it still was called the Shrine of Friendship. Pioneer, it was broadcast on the radio. Wednesday mornings, So that was just kind of interesting.
Are you driving?
Whenever they have something at the hall that sounds